comic book eras are somewhat debatable, but they give us an idea of where books fall. We're going to take a look at the start of the Bronze Age here on Bronzeville Comics. Hey there, comic book community. This is Jim from Bronzeville Comics coming to you with another video. Before we get started, if you like the content, like, comment, subscribe. I really appreciate it. Appreciate everyone that comments on the videos and gives us a thumbs up. It's really, really awesome. And follow us on the other socials, Instagram, Bronzeville_comics, whatnot, Bronzeville_comics. We have sales every Monday night at 10 p.m. However, next week, much like this week, we're going to be doing a Tuesday 10 p.m. sale. More Marvel, Silver and Bronze. And if you are not yet on Whatnot, but you're interested, if you sign up through the link in the description, you can get $10 off your first purchase, regardless of which seller that's with. It doesn't have to be me. And also, you'll see some of the books I have available. There's a link to my eBay store in the description as well. Well, let's get started. The eras of comic books, generally speaking, there's one book that kicks off the Golden Age, and that's Action Comics #1 in 1938, which is the first appearance of Superman, the first prototype superpowered superhero, the granddaddy of them all, and what really got DC Comics on the map. And within 3 years, there were dozens of superheroes in comic books from all different publishers. Now, when the Golden Age ends, and if there's another age between gold and silver, that is the subject of debate, not something we're going to debate right here or discuss. The next big era is the Silver Age, and the Silver Age is considered to have begun in 1956 with the publishing of Showcase #4 by DC Comics, the first appearance of the Barry Allen version of The Flash. There had been a Golden Age Flash for DC, played by with the secret identity Jay Garrick, who premiered in Flash Comics #1, was a member of the Justice Society of America, and had his own quarterly book, All Flash Comics. DC in the 1950s started to update a lot of those classic Golden Age heroes who had gone out of print with newer versions of the character, and Barry Allen was one of them. Now, Marvel Comics really didn't start their Silver Age until 1961 with the publishing of Fantastic Four #1. And the Silver Age is, if any creative team dominated the Silver Age, it was Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. Because right after Fantastic Four, in rapid succession, came Thor, came the X-Men, the Avengers, all things that Kirby had a hand in. And Stan Lee also had a hand in Daredevil and Iron Man and Doctor Strange, and so many of the other characters that are the basis of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But it isn't as clear-cut when it comes to when does the Bronze Age begin, and I have my ideas. My ideas aren't necessarily what everyone would go by, but I think just some things to consider. So, throughout the Golden Age, the number of pages in the standard comic book slowly decreased from 64 to 52 to 48, down to 32 pages between the covers. That was common through the Silver Age and into the Bronze Age. And that was able to have publishers that decreased page count maintain the 10-cent cover price up until about 1961, 1962, when they went to 12 cents. Now, in 1969, both DC and Marvel, their standard comic books went from 12 cents to 15 cents. May of 1969 for DC, 3 months later for Marvel. And both companies would maintain that 50-cent price until 1971. Neither the beginning of the 15-cent or the end of the 15-cent is what marks the beginning of the Bronze Age, in my opinion. DC stayed with 15 cents until August of 1971, at which time all their titles went to 25 cents with larger page count, 48 pages plus cover, and they would remain that way for a year. Marvel, in October of 71, just 2 months after DC increased their page count, and both DC and Marvel were able to increase the price of the comic book from 15 cents to 25 cents with the additional content. For Marvel, that lasted just 1 month. And then the following month, they were back down to 32 pages, and they had dropped the price to 20 cents. DC would do that in mid-1972. And it was also a cost-saving measure because a lot of the extra content were reprints, things that were already there, they didn't have to pay creators for. So also, since Marvel, from the end of 1971 through the middle of 1972, their books were cost less than DC. Marvel really took over the market share of comic books in North America. Now, when we talk about the Bronze Age, there are essentially two books that a lot of people in the hobby point to as the books that ushered in the Bronze Age. And those two books would be Green Lantern 76, which updated the book. Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams took over the creative chores. Green Arrow kind of became the co-star of the book. He was listed on the cover. However, the book never changed in the indicia. It was always Green Lantern, even though on the cover it said Green Lantern, Green Arrow. That book from DC came out in April of 1970. The other book that people point to is Conan the Barbarian #1, the adaptation of the Robert E. Howard pulp character, with stories written by Roy Thomas and art by Barry Windsor Smith. That came out 6 months later, cover dated October 1970. But I don't think those books stand alone, and I think we should look at the beginning of the Bronze Age as a transition, and I have maybe a more definitive turning point, at least in my estimation. Now, some people have pointed to Amazing Spider-Man 121, The Death of Gwen Stacy. That book came out, cover dated July 1973, and I think that's a little too late to mark the beginning of the Bronze Age. There was more serious content in there. The Comics Code Authority had loosened. And if you go back to 1972, that's when Marvel started publishing their horror books that are becoming quite popular now with the Werewolf by Night Halloween special on the horizon. Marvel Spotlight 2 in February of 1972 was really Marvel's first character horror book. They had published horror since the 1950s, but it was a little more tame and it wasn't as driven by the same character month after month. And after Werewolf by Night, we shortly got The Tomb of Dracula, we got Ghost Rider, we got Son of Satan, Man-Thing, and a lot of others. Meanwhile, over at DC, it was a little bit earlier. In House of Secrets 92 was the first appearance of Swamp Thing. Swamp Thing, that book premiered in June of 1971. Now, Man-Thing, the similar character, premiered about the same time in Savage Tales magazine. So 1972 did mark a breaking point in terms of horror. Swamp Thing got his own book that year, and that did cause a change, but I think we have to go a little bit earlier. And if we go back into 1971, two of the most popular characters changed course a little bit. In January of 1971, Superman premiered in a story, Kryptonite No More, in which all kryptonite was eliminated from Earth and Superman no longer had the weakness to it. That was in Superman number 233, cover date January 1971, with this classic Neil Adams cover. Marvel's big hero, Spider-Man, really took a step forward in level of maturity with issue number 96, cover dated May 1971, which was a book which incorporated the idea of drug abuse, and because of that, more mature content did not receive the Comic Code Authority stamp, which every Marvel and DC book had been since the establishment of the Comics Code Authority in the 1950s. Green Lantern, Green Arrow would follow suit shortly thereafter with their own book. So in 1971, we started to have a little more mature titles. I really, in quick shorthand, I look at the start of the Bronze Age as 1970, the year. It's an easy demarcation. It's a new decade. When you're looking at books and you look at the cover date, you don't have to sort down by month. I just, like when I'm listing books and whatnot as silver versus bronze, 1969 and earlier silver, 1970 forward is bronze. A lot of things happened in 1970, and let's start right at the beginning of the year in January of 1970. And probably the most influential creative team of the Bronze Age, that's Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams. Their first work on Batman was in Detective Comics number 395, cover date January 1970. And just 2 months later, they would have their work in Batman number 220, which changed the trade dress from the campier style that we saw in the Silver Age to this sleeker, I would say, trade dress. I'm not sure if it was designed by Adams or not, but that's a Neil Adams cover. And O'Neil and Adams were working on Batman, and they also took over the chores on Green Lantern. Just a month following Batman 220 was the publishing of Green Lantern 76, which is a seminal moment in comic books. Now, so it's really the first quarter of 1970 that DC is moving forward and really giving Adams and O'Neil a lot more free reign and to explore their titles. And we could see Neil Adams did a lot of covers. He did work for Marvel earlier and Avengers and X-Men. But I think it was his collaboration with O'Neil that really changed the comic book industry. So many classic covers by DC at the time, and they were trying to figure out a way to get away from kind of the more childish stories of the Silver Age, specifically moving away from stories that were akin to the 1966 Batman TV series, which was very campy. And I think they were trying to move away from that. As a matter of fact, the Joker was absent from comics for over 4 years. Let's move a little bit later in the year. And this is where I draw the demarcation line. Okay? For Marvel Comics specifically. Conan number 1, as I mentioned before, cover dated October 1970. If we consider October 1970 as the beginning of the Bronze Age of comics for Marvel, then with the publishing of Conan number 1. Then we have to go back 1 month earlier to September 1970 and talk about the end of the Silver Age. And I think the one book that really epitomizes the fact that the Silver Age was over came out in September 1970, Fantastic Four number 102, the final work by Jack Kirby on that title. 102 straight issues of Lee and Kirby on Fantastic Four. They redefined comic books during the Silver Age. That ended in September 1970. DC was already moving forward with some interesting material, and then the book that people consider the kind of co-parent of the Bronze Age, Conan number 1, came out the very next month, as did Fantastic Four number 103 without Kirby. Interestingly, also in September 1970 was the publication of Silver Surfer number 18, which was the final issue of the Silver Surfer run, the character who Stan Lee described as his favorite character, and it was also written by Lee and drawn by Kirby. So I think FF number 102 and Silver Surfer 18, September 1970, that's the end of the Silver Age. The next month, with the publication of Conan number 1, we're talking about the beginning of the Bronze Age. If I had to boil it down to a 1 month differential, it's September to October of 1970. If I'm looking more general terms at the year, which is a little bit easier, you can just say the Bronze Age starts in 1970. The Silver Age goes from 1956 to 1969. Now, when does the Bronze Age end? That's a question for another video. Please leave a comment below on what you think the end of the Silver Age is, or the beginning of the Bronze Age, however you want to define it. I'd be interested in your feedback. I'm by no way saying mine's the only way to think about it. I think this is an interesting debate, and a lot of it comes down to what is important to you personally. Are you a big Conan fan? Then that book might mean a lot to you. Were you reading comics at the time? What changed the way that you were reading comics? Again, leave that in the comments below. You could take a look at here at a couple of my other recent videos. And this is Jim saying until next time, enjoy your comics.